Traveling is dangerous. Um, I'll never forget my first book to ever read. I've shared this with you before, but I'll just kind of revisit it again. My first ever book to read, my uncle gave me, was Robinson Crusoe. Anybody read that book, Robinson Crusoe? It's an awesome story. In fact, it's Daniel Defoe is the author, and he writes this in the early 1700s, and he writes it based upon a true story about a one of the British commanders that gets lost at sea in a big storm and off of the coast of South America. He ends up spending like 3 or 4 years there. Now, spoiler alert: in Daniel Defoe's narrative, Robinson Crusoe is there for 26 years or 28 years. And he's on this island, but he's this young rebellious kid. He wants to get out and see the world. He's tired of staying at home. I mean, it's the narrative. It's not changed, right? I mean, when kids join the military today, why is it oftentimes they want to get out, they want to see the world, they want to travel, do big things, go big places, right? And this is what he wanted to do. He wanted to sell the world, and he wanted to see everything. He wanted to get out of his little bubble there in England. And then, of course, he runs away without his parents' approval. And he gets on this ship, and then there's this big storm that comes, and they go shipwrecked off of the islands of South America. And Robinson Crusoe is now stuck on this island, and now he has to figure out how he's going to live. And what's amazing is that the ship is there close to where he is, and he's able to go back and get on the ship. All the men died. He's the only one that survived. And there's all this treasure and all this gold, which he cannot really do anything with. But there's also all these, they were Catholic, the ones that were selling, and he finds all these Bibles. And he finds all these liturgical items for worship. And he starts recognizing, and he starts thinking about his life and how ungrateful he was. And he realizes, and there's this phrase that Daniel Defoe keeps repeating. He says, all these things happened, and you should have known this, which he's quoting from the book of Daniel, where God speaks to Nebuchadnezzar, right? And God's revealed something, and he took it for granted, didn't take it to heart. But finally, Robinson Crusoe recognizes, and he reads about the gospel. And he comes to faith in Yeshua. By the way, do you hear teachers in school talk about this as a part of the major narrative of Robinson Crusoe? It's about a man who gets stranded on an island and comes to faith in the gospel of Yeshua Messiah because he reads the gospel and reads about his condition. And he reads about how ungrateful he was and how much yet God had preserved his life even though he was on this stranded island and God was providing for him through the means of what was on this ship and how God had provided food and all of this stuff for him on this island, and he's able to survive and find a way and a means to get by for up to 28 years. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful narrative about God's goodness in the midst of hardship. And so we read about this shipwreck that's going to happen. And Paul says, look, don't do this because this is what's going to happen. We're in the fall now, and we know from other historical sources that there was a time when sailing was forbidden. You could possibly sail, I think, from mid-September to the end of October, but you were supposed to sail at your own risk. But after that point, you're not supposed to sail at all. Paul says, look, let's not do this. We need to stay here. Listen to my advice. But they don't. And why? Probably because they're worried about their financial gains. They're worried about what they're going to be able to procure. And they said, look, we're smarter. We realize what we really need here. And you are just they didn't know who Paul was, possibly. But in verse 18 through 20, I want to continue. In verse 18. The next day, as we were being violently storm-tossed, they began to jettison the cargo. In other words, they start to push things over. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. And since neither the sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm was assailing us, from then on, all hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. I want you to think about that. All hope of our being saved had been abandoned.